whose blood stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight on the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the ragged eagle heaven's bursting in earth gave proof to the light that the flag was still there. Oh, sailors at stars hang up
ceremony that has lasted about an hour. Rishabh Gulati, my editor-in-chief on the broadcast with me. Rishabh, those 15 of those executive orders, Donald Trump has not been shy in mincing words and of course not wasting time in putting out his orders.
Let's jump straight in because there is so much that is about to happen that has a bearing directly on America and of course on the global affairs. Donald Trump now, the 47th United States President, has in his inaugural address announced at least 15 immediate executive orders either to be signed today or in the subsequent days. The first, he says, is the invocation of a national emergency at the southern border. This is something he's done before in 2019, which is where the funding to start building the wall on the border to Mexico was achieved. It is something fundamentally important because it gives the United States President at least 130 statutory powers with almost no congressional oversight, including the diversion of quote-unquote military construction spending and other acts, which can only be removed from Congress with a veto level vote that takes place, so very unlikely. Number two, he has decided that all human trafficking cartels will be labeled as foreign terrorist organizations by the United States government. Number three, he has announced a crackdown on inflation, which I assume in the subtext will be an executive order ordering amendments into Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. Number four, he has said that all restrictions on oil drilling that have been imposed will be removed. Number five, he has said that the Green New Deal invoked by the previous administration will be removed. Number six, he says the EV mandate, which means that several states in the United States as well as the federal laws mandating the rollout of electric vehicles by a certain date, many by 2030, will be removed. Number seven, he says there will be an overhaul of trade tariffs. Number eight, he has announced the formation of an external revenue service. Number nine, he has confirmed the inauguration of a Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. Number 10, he has said that he will issue an executive order immediately stopping all government censorship. Number 11, he says that the rules on inclusion and diversity brought under President Biden will be rescinded. Number 12, he says the United States of America will officially adopt only two genders, male and female. Number 13, he says anti-vaxxers in the armed forces are to be reinstated with full back pay. Number 14, he says the Gulf of Mexico will be renamed in all US maps as the Gulf of America. And number 15, on a minor note, he says that the restoration of the name of Mount McKinley will be done.
Okay, all right. So taking those points one after the other, let me get in my panelists into this conversation. I have with me Jason Isaacson, who's the US Political and Strategic Affairs expert. He is part of the American Jewish Committee. He handles public policy at the American Jewish Committee. Thank you, Jason Isaacson. And my first question, let's dive deep into the national emergency that he has imposed at the southern border. What does this imply? What is going to be the immediate impact of it?
Well, thanks very much for having me on. It was quite a speech. Look, what it means is massive enforcement of the kind of halt in immigration across the southern border. It means return in Mexico, as he said, which was a policy of the first Trump administration. It means as he said, the deportation of millions of criminal aliens. It means, I assume, as your correspondent just said, a return to construction of the very, very partially completed border wall. The deployment of American military to the southern border in a way that is not traditional, because it speaks to what he is describing as a national emergency. And it's just a mobilization of American government resources to halt, to the extent it's possible to completely halt, migration across that southern border. Whether there will be associated with all this new procedures put in place for the seeking and granting of asylum, what will be done about the separation of families, some of whom have members who are legally in the United States and others are not legally in the United States. Will parents who came here and had children in the United States, but they themselves were not legal migrants, will they somehow be rounded up and expelled? What we've been hearing over the last few weeks was some indications that the focus would be on criminal aliens, illegal or undocumented migrants who had criminal backgrounds, criminal records. That's one thing. But if he's going to have a very grand sweep of, frankly, everyone, it's something else entirely. It will cause enormous disruption in families, in schools, in labor markets, in construction. There's a lot that we'll still have to unpack and look at over the coming.
It's also interesting to note that he has called them foreign terrorist organizations, these cartels and organizations and communities. Do you think he's taken this too much?
I'm sorry. Do I think it will? I didn't hear that last word.
Foreign terrorist organizations. He's called these illegal aliens, their communities and their organizations that are inhabiting different parts of America as foreign terrorist organizations. Now, this is a bit too harsh. Do you think?
Yeah. Well, look. I mean, cartels are criminal gangs, and whether they're they deserve the full weight of American law enforcement. The distinction between going after them as criminal elements or under racketeering statutes or a whole range of other legal enforcement mechanisms, as opposed to attacking them as foreign terrorist organizations, which involves the cutoff of any assets that they might have through the Treasury Department. There's a whole range of regulations that would be invoked by making them FTOs.
Yeah.
We certainly have the tools as a government to go after these cartels through a variety of legal processes. This just adds one more element.
Okay, I'm going to come back to you, Jason. Let me get in on the telecast with me, Alex Isaac. Alex, let's understand from you. You know, there are two of these national emergencies that have been imposed. We were talking about the national emergency at the southern border against the Mexicans who have been infiltrating America. Is the crackdown that Donald Trump has made, the president has made. The second of those national emergencies has been imposed by Donald Trump through his executive order is the national emergency, an energy emergency, and he has rolled back these mandates, these EV mandates, and asking auto manufacturers to cut down on their green cut down on their carbon emissions. How is this going to impact? He's particularly spoken about the auto manufacturing industry in America, manufacturing the cheapest cars across the globe.
Well, we were expecting him to talk about climate issues, and saying that he was going to ban electric cars did come a little bit off left field, though. I think that many are worried about how we're going to move forward with this net zero promise that was made by all sorts of administrations across the globe, and now talking about trying to manufacture cars and products within America itself. The idea behind it that he had put across is that he wants to ensure that America can make its own products and then can export them instead of importing everything from abroad. And he did obviously mention China in his long inauguration speech. But it will be interesting how we move forward. A lot of what he said in a lot of the points are quite quick wins. They are meant to cause a shock. They're meant to get people talking, but whether or not he will push everything through, that will be something that will be seen. And no doubt a lot of the leaders of the world will be coming forward and asking as well, what exactly are you planning? How are you going to ensure that there is going to be some consideration when it comes to the climate, when you're building these new manufacturing bases and when you're building these cars? So it's something that we will be definitely looking towards, especially here in the UK.
Okay, all right. Interesting point. Andrew K.P. Leung, when you talk about tariffs, and there has been a strong statement made by President Trump talking about how there are going to be tariffs to the tune of 60% on Chinese goods. And he's also invoked President McKinley, who was the progenitor of this law in 1890 that put in protectionist walls around America and put in huge tariffs on imports coming into the country. How is this going to impact China? Do we have Andrew Leung? Can you hear me?
Andrew, you're on mute.
Okay, we'll try to get him back into the broadcast in just a moment. I'm going to pose the same question to Adrian Calamel. How do you view this situation, talking about China, the tariff policy? Do you think this is going to be beneficial to Americans? Do you think this is going to adversely impact China? How is the road going to be ahead for American trade?
Well, great question. Thank you for having me. If you look at American adversaries out there, and if you want to rank them in power from, let's say, the least to the strongest, you start with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Then you move to Russia, Putin's Russia, and then you move to Xi's China. You can't deal with them all. You can't compartmentalize these. They have to be dealt holistically. And China is by far the strongest player out of this entire group. And they're the ones that probably keep Trump up at night the most, or should keep him up at night. So what we have is him trying to use economic leverage. And it's going to be also, we'll see more come out about the defense of Taiwan and the importance of that. But clearly, there needs to be some type of understanding here. China has plays in the gray zone with the economic rules, continues to, we play within certain structures, they play with outside of them, and to our own detriment. And what Trump's saying is, what we have economic leverage, and we're willing to use that to try to get you in line.
Yeah, absolutely. He's not missed any words. He's been straightforward. He has said that those executive orders are going to be issued in the next few days. He has been talking about them, vouching for the kind of campaigning that he had done, and raised exactly the same points as he at this point of time has been reading them off when he spoke to the public for the first time when he gave that address. I'm going to get in Irina Sukumin. Irina, the situation here, particularly with regards to how he has focused in the last 1 week or so on taking control of Panama Canal. He's spoken about how he is going to rename Gulf of Mexico as Gulf of America. How is this going to be of symbolic importance to the way Trump administration is going to take things forward, and what are the practical advantages that the Trump administration is going to bring about for the country, for the economy, when Trump says that he's going to take over Panama Canal?
Well, Donald Trump has 2 years to implement most of his agenda, because in 2 years from now, most likely the Congress will flip. The House of Representatives, practically speaking, already has an extremely razor-thin majority, which will need to be calibrated to the pressure by the Democrats on many issues. So there's a question of symbolic executive orders, of which Trump can write any number, and then there's the issue of actually funding what he considers his priorities. So he will have to limit his priorities to key issues that he can actually gain congressional support and funding from, and I think military action against Panama is not going to be one of them.
Okay.
I think the Gulf of America issue is symbolic. I think it's red meat for his supporters. I think it's not going to survive past his presidency, nor will it be widely adopted outside the United States. I do think the concerns about Panama are legitimate. I think the resurrection of the Monroe Doctrine is important, and I think China's moves in South America are concerning, and I think Trump is right to indicate a problem that needs to be discussed with our allies in South America. I think military action is highly unlikely, and if Trump does try that, it's going to backfire tremendously.
Okay, all right. I also have with me Glenn Grant. And Glenn, do you think it's interesting, because Trump had been campaigning and talking about how he's going to take away military aid from Ukraine to fight its war against Russia. He had also spoken about how the spending of America when it comes to providing military aid to the NATO allies is going to reduce substantially. That does not find mention in his speech today.
No, which is interesting. Probably because it's one, or they are things that he can't talk so bigly about and say how wonderful everything is going to be, because he knows full well these are difficult subjects. What does worry me, though, I am worried about his comments about Panama, because I think that others will not see this as just words. I think that Russia and China will now think that if America thinks it can go and take over somewhere, that they can go and take over somewhere. And I'm concerned that they may feel that they're being given the green light to do more than they've done so far. We wait and see.
Okay. All right, exactly. It is interesting. There have been very strong statements that have been made. Dr. Emma Long, let's understand, when he talks about there is going to be freedom of speech restored, is what he had to say. We've also seen the kind of developments that have happened in the last few weeks and months, especially when it comes to the Wall Street, especially when it comes to Jeff Bezos. And then obviously the Facebook owner and CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, they have decided to revoke their restrictions that were imposed on Facebook on putting out content, and how that content is going to be checked. There are going to be no fact checkers any longer. There is going to be a community group that is going to be created on the lines of X. Do you think these companies, these big tech companies, are also aligning themselves to Trump's new policy that he also spoke about today?
Yeah, I think we've seen this over the past few weeks, haven't we? As the CEOs of these companies have cozied up to Trump. They've put money into the Inaugural fund. They were there at the Inaugural today. I think they're concerned about what Trump might do if they choose to stand against him, even if they were inclined to do so. And I think it's worth bearing in mind when Trump talks about freedom of speech. He's got a very particular idea of freedom of speech in mind, which doesn't necessarily ally with how other people might define that right. Thinking about other elements of his speech just then, talking about education and LGBTQ rights and trans rights, where there are issues here where the policies that he's talking about are actually going to limit the right of certain groups to speak otherwise. So I think we need to be aware that when he uses that phrase, he's talking about the rights of free speech for some people and not necessarily everybody.
Mm-hmm. I also have with me, I think Andrew is back with us on the telecast. Andrew Leung, the question, first of all, talking about tariffs against China, 60% of them, that has been one of his executive orders that he has announced that is going to be rolled in the coming days and weeks. Secondly, more importantly, interestingly, he's spoken for the last few days. He has been talking about Panama Canal and how United States wants to take control of Panama Canal, and talking about how the operations at this point of time have been handed over to China, which is a threat to, which is making things difficult for America. How do you have to view these things?
Well, I think that this time around, China is much more prepared for this unpredictable Trump administration, having gone through the first Trump term. But I think from China's perspective, this Trump administration is going to upend the whole world order in three ways. The firstly is the so-called American-led liberal world order. Trump is going to promote the principle that American might is right, and it's going to bend the whole world to Americans' will. Well, I mean, that calls into question what is this American-led liberal world order? It's neither liberal, it's not for the whole world, it's just for America, and it's not particularly orderly, because it's order sacrificing other countries' sovereignty to suit Americans' needs.
Okay.
Secondly, well, let me finish, please. Secondly, the imposition of tariffs, massive tariffs, 60% or even 100%, is going to upend the whole world supply and value chain. And of course, it will affect the interests of American consumers. And then things are going to be much more costly for the American consumer, and that will lead to inflation, which affect the rest of the world. Thirdly, I think it's on climate change. Trump is known to be promoting drill, baby, drill, and is going to exploit Americans' fossil oil resources so as to get more money, from the fossil wealth of the United States. So all these three dimensions suggest that this is the Trump administration is going to disrupt the whole world. Now, as far as China is concerned, I don't think that China would take advantage of it to advance adventurism. China is very square-eyed about the whole thing. And as far as Taiwan is concerned, Beijing's always emphasis on peaceful unification, because the Taiwan people and the Chinese people, I mean, they are increasingly intermingled in terms of tourism, in terms of investments, in terms of people-to-people exchanges. So there would come a time. There is no need to hurry, because President Xi has made it quite plain that the latest time is 2049. It's still some years ahead. That's the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic of China. But then the emphasis has always been on peaceful unification. So I don't think that China would be emboldened to take any kind of adventurous measures. But the three kind of disruptions are likely to highlight China's role to promote a more inclusive world, and also respecting other people's development interests, and would enhance China's position, particularly in the global south.
Okay, all right. I also have with me Yevhenia Kravchuk, who's a Ukrainian member of parliament. Yevhenia, what is your key takeaway from President Trump's speech right after he was inaugurated as the 47th president of America, particularly when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia crisis, and how he has been talking about wanting to be the unifier and the peacemaker of the world?
Well, first of all, obviously, the goals of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are different ones, because Putin wants to wage
the war, and obviously he has some ideas of waging the war even for some other European countries, and that's his doctrine about the Russian Empire and so on and so forth. Donald Trump, in the contrary, said that he wants to finish wars, he wants to be a peace builder, and also we know his formula that it has to be peace through strength. In Ukraine, we believe that Ukraine has to be stronger to be in position to come to a just peace, because we do not want to have another war waged by Russian Federation after a few years, when they, stop, pause, rebuild, regroup, get more missiles, get more men mobilized, and so on and so forth. Also, in the inauguration speech, when Trump said that he will lift all the limits on the natural resources, so drilling, that's bad news for Putin as well, because that will mean that more of United States oil and gas will come to Europe and to other countries, which means actually the prices that could come down for the natural resources needed. And of course, we hope that there will be a meeting of President Zelensky and President Donald Trump to discuss further steps, because obviously this peace plan is work in progress, because we didn't hear any details from President Trump.
Okay, all right, interesting perspective. Let me also get in Scott Faulkner, who's joining me on the telecast right now. Scott Faulkner, I want to highlight particularly about how unapologetically Christian religious ceremony was conducted. We had 4 reverends, and they invoked the Lord 3 times in their speeches each. Do you find this an anomaly, or do you see American presidents taking ceremonies to be in the same tenor? Because if something were to happen, something similar were to happen in India during an oath-taking ceremony of the Prime Minister of the country, and if there were the Hindu gods that were invoked or the Muslim gods that were invoked, all hell would break loose.
Well, America is a Judeo-Christian country. That was our founding principles. Moses, the lawgiver, is in front of the Supreme Court in their architecture. He and other Abraham and all the others are iconic and surround the House of Representatives. So when you look at all of the inaugurals, and this was the 60th one for the United States, going back to George Washington, every one of them started with a prayer and ended with a benediction. So it's so the Judeo-Christian traditions of America, which our democracy and republic are built upon, are reaffirmed as part of the inaugural ceremony and iconography. And so this is not unusual. What was interesting to me was that, especially in the remarks that opened the inaugural, they were a little more muscular and, let us say, militaristic than usual. You don't usually hear General Patton being invoked in a prayer. So that was an interesting change of tone. But in terms of the actual religiosity of that wraps around the inauguration of an American president, it's always been there.
Okay, all right.